You're listening to ThunderQuack Podcast Network.
Hello there, and welcome back to Force Perspectives. I am your host, Michael Cohen, and joining me, as always, the foe to my bead, Joe Hogan.
I can't think of anything else he says other than, like, I'm pretty sure he announces Team Toe Pagalis or something, or whatever that guy's name.
I mean, we're gonna dig in. We're gonna go all in. I know the last episode that we did, we talked about our Phantom Menace memories, but we didn't actually talk about the movie. Since we recorded the last episode, and we took last week off because life was just, I think, a little bit hectic for both of us. I had sick kids, and you had work to catch up on, and it's just been. May is a rough month, I think, for both of us because it's our birthday months and Star Wars Day and you know, like
Busy.
it's my mom's birthday. It was my dad's birthday, so there's like sort of an aspect there of I have to observe that with my mom as well. Their birthdays were 2 days apart. So I got to do that, and then it's Mother's Day. It's like it's May, and then my birthday's at the end of the month. So
I also have my brother-in-law's birthday at the end of the month too, so it's just like, nothing's getting done in May.
Yeah, May's just one of those months, right? But so we took last week off, but in the time in between recording the last one and now, we both went and saw Phantom Menace in the theater again. For me, it was, I think, the fourth time that I've seen it on the big screen.
Nice.
The last time would have been when it was in 3D. I think I saw it twice when it was in 3D because it was like. It was pretty rad when it was in 3D. The pod race was so good in 3D. I'm trying to remember if I think I watched part of it at a celebration at one point, but no, I think that was Attack of the Clones.
Because they used to just have them like playing, right?
Yeah,
like you could just walk into the theater and just whatever movie's playing, you just sit down and watch it. Pretty cool.
Yeah.
That was Orlando that did that, right? I don't think it was
Yeah, that was in Orlando. That was the last time that I remember them doing like just the screenings, right? And that one meant that was 2012, I think, and they had the 3D Attack of the Clones, and that's like the only time it's ever been shown, I think. But I'm trying to remember. But in any case, I just having watched it, I was like, man, this movie is so good, and all the people who hate on it, anyways, but before we get into that, Joe and we wanted to take a minute up top to talk about Palestine, and this is like a prepared statement, guys, so like buckle up. Because I just want to be really clear about where we're at with this. So we just want to take a minute up top to talk about Palestine and the genocide currently being perpetrated by the Israeli government. First and foremost, if you have the means, please go to Operation Olive Branch to find out how you can contribute to helping families fleeing from Gaza. The link tree is in the show notes, but you can also just search Operation Olive Branch and you'll find it. It's like right up top, like you'll find the link tree or the TikTok, whatever, and then you just follow the links there. Second, we're not here to debate this topic. There's a massive amount of information online regarding the injustices enacted upon the people of Palestine by the occupying Israeli government. We are not experts on these subjects, but we also believe it doesn't take any expertise to see what is plainly going on in front of our eyes. And that is the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip. No amount of research should be required to believe that the slaughter of over 13,000 innocent children is wrong and must be stopped. Third, notice that I have only referred to the occupying force as the Israeli government. That's because these acts are being carried out by the government of Israel and its military, not by its citizens. The vast majority of Israeli citizens are against the actions of their government and are calling for a ceasefire. And many, many Jews, myself included, support a free Palestine and an end to the conflict. Lastly, if you're a Star Wars fan and any of this makes you uncomfortable, I would ask you to seriously consider what it is about Star Wars that you find meaningful. Because if you're watching, reading, or playing through the same stories I am, I find it hard to believe you don't understand right from wrong, good versus evil. The allegory present in Star Wars, the allegories present in Star Wars are there specifically to warn us about these kinds of historical events. When an oppressive, militant, imperialist institution uses propaganda and religious zealotry to justify the worst atrocities mankind is capable of. It should be clear as day who the bad guys are in this conflict, who the Imperials are, and who the rebels are. Once again, if you have the ability to do so, please go to the Operation Olive Branch link tree in the show notes and find a way to contribute. It's literally the least any of us can do. So yeah, I think I've been a little bit, I don't know if reluctant. I haven't really like known how to approach this subject for the last couple of months, but things are getting to a point 7 months into this specific stage of the conflict. It's a conflict that's been going on for decades. But 7 months in since October 7th, it's just what's happening to innocent people in Gaza with the backing of the American government and previously the Canadian government. Thankfully, the Canadian government just recently said that they are no longer going to be supplying any um, uh, weapons or anything to Israel, which is a huge deal. Because we're one of like the main allies, but in any case, it's like that's not enough. Just stopping supplying them with weapons isn't enough. So yeah, like I don't know. I've been sitting on social media lately, seeing all this stuff and going like what can I do? what reach do we have? And I just thought, it's kind of enough is enough, and we needed to make a little bit of a statement, especially just to be super clear where it is we stand in relation to all of this stuff. And there's these Gen Z kids putting everything on the line, their careers, their freedom, all of this stuff to protest at these universities. And I was like, man, saying a few words on a podcast is literally the least that I can do. So yeah, if you have the ability, please go and contribute to some of these efforts to help people who are fleeing, help them escape uh, what's happening right now, because it's crazy, it's insane. I mean, it shouldn't even have to be that, but that's the situation that folks are in right now. They're real human beings being affected by this. It's not it might feel like it's a world away or it's happening to some other group, but it's like is real people being affected by it. And I think social media for the first time is actually doing a good job of showing us that and making the reality of that really clear. So yeah, I don't know, Joe, did you have anything that you wanted to add? Or
I mean, 99% of the time, you will make a very articulate, well-informed opinion and statement. And I will always say, yeah. But this time, it is that same yeah is with all of the sincerity and enthusiasm that I possibly can. Um, I don't think I could say it any better than you did. I agree with you 100%. And it's fun. Last night is the first time you and I have spoken about this period, and like I've been. I don't think I'm completely 200% well informed on everything going on, but like I have been paying attention to it. I have been specifically like trying to educate myself on it over the last couple of months. Um, and yeah, I mean, as usual on topics of morality, you and I usually seem to kind of gel in the same direction. So
Mhm. Mhm.
100% agree. Uh, if you can support Operation Olive Branch, please consider doing so. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And we're gonna, I think you and I are gonna dig into this a little bit more and discuss
Hmm.
some things on off the record. So if people are interested to hear that, it'll be over on our Patreon. But yeah, that's it for here. I just, it was just one of those things. I'm like, I just can't keep sitting here and going like, it's not really our place. It's not really, and it is
Yeah.
such a divisive thing, but
I mean, for us, it's the discomfort of like, oh, do we get involved?
mhm,
I mean, me personally, like, I don't really like talking politics, and it's not because I don't have convictions of my politics in general, but like, this shouldn't be politics. This is
mhm.
moral right and wrong.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that's kind of where I'm
absolutely.
at.
Absolutely. Okay, let's switch gears back to the fun topic. But definitely go do it. Go contribute if you can. And even if just on social media, just sharing things and just amplifying other people's voices is also helpful. Because then the people who can help, it's ridiculous. We're in the middle of, like, affordability crisis, housing crisis, just nonsense left, right, and center, the rise of fascism in North America as well. And it's like, we got to stop and, deal with this too. It's I'm kind of tired of living through history, but
Mm.
um we're gonna talk about some fake history, some outer space history
We're gonna go
to
back. We're gonna go back 25 years.
yeah. So yeah, let's jump into it. Let's get into the Phantom Menace. So I went and saw it, not this past weekend, the one before. And I took the girls, and Crystal came. Um and I sat there in the movie, really like trying to sort of be, I don't know if critical is the right word for it, but just sort of trying to take it in. First time that I've seen it in theaters since the 3D, which I think is like, I mean, that's like 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think that was
Maybe,
2011, if I remember
yeah.
correctly.
Um,
Maybe
yeah, so more
2012.
than that, right? I just with everything that I know now about filmmaking, everything, which, I mean, like, it's not like I didn't know a lot back then, but so much more knowledge and experience, and so much more, I hope, wisdom at this point,
Mm.
with the years of experience, that I have, accumulated since the last time that I saw it in the theater. Just trying to watch the movie with new eyes, and really evaluate, what's the line here, because there are a lot of people who will tell you that it's a bad movie, and it's like, well, how are we defining bad movie, um and what I came away from it with was that, the internet ruins everything, um and b, like, if we define the Phantom Menace as a bad movie, then we have to look at our definition of what a bad movie is, because this film is far from a bad movie. Like, does it have its flaws? Absolutely, and we're going to talk about it. But is it a great film? Is it a well made, well executed film? It is. It really is. Like, we do a lot of prequel apologizing, on Quack across the last 16 years. A lot of prequel apologizing, and I wear that with a badge of, honor, of pride, that the prequel apologist, prequel defense force, that badge. Like, absolutely, like, I will go to the bat for these movies, and I would have done that before, but having just watched this movie in the theater again, and to be super clear, the theater that I saw it at, the projection was garbage, so like, it did not look as good as if I was watching it at home on my TV, on my 4K
Oh,
TV.
this that like 2 week, like when you just saw it recently, it
Yeah,
didn't look good.
yeah.
Oh man, that
It was fuzzy to the point that Kara, after the movie, was like, it looked really bad. um, and the sound was kind of meh, but like it didn't matter. Like the movie itself is a really 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 good movie, and I don't did we talk about this on another podcast recently, or I can't remember if I said this somewhere else. um Jake Lloyd gets so much flack, and I
Well, yeah,
just
you and I just spoke about episode 1 in general, right? Like
yeah,
we just had our
but but
episode
I,
1 memories, but I feel like yeah, we
but
did
after
specifically talk
yeah
about that.
after having just watched the movie, it like I am just I that was one of the things that I think I paid the most attention to was Jake Lloyd's performance.
Mhm.
And because it is one of the places where people in the past I would have said rightly criticized the film. I watched it, and I was just like, they're like, it's totally incorrect. It's just totally incorrect. Like his performance is actually very good, with the exception of the yippies. His performance is very good. There are a couple of like sort of um I don't know, stiff line deliveries,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I would say the funny thing about that is that when you take into account Jake Lloyd, Hayden Christensen, Matt Lanter, James Earl Jones, and let's even throw Sebastian Shaw in there just for fun. Um, you take into account all of the performances of Anakin across the saga. I actually think that like those sort of stiff line deliveries are in perfect tune with that character. Um, and I've said that about Hayden's performance as Anakin forever. Like since Revenge of the Sith, basically,
Mm.
people criticize his performance, and I'd be like, he's literally delivering the lines of dialogue in the way that James Earl Jones did.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, like like the point, and I think what George was going for with that is that it's like when it's coming out of the mouth of this fresh-faced pretty boy, it's weird. It's a little bit off-putting and confusing, but then like the artifice of Darth Vader turns him into this other thing, into this
Mhm.
icon of the
Yeah.
dark side, right? um but yeah, like there are many lines of dialogue in Attack of the Clones where I'm like, that's just like if you pitch that down and do all of the processing that they do for Vader's voice, that sounds like Vader. It
Mhm.
sounds just like Vader, in terms of the way that the lines were delivered, and that's intentional. Like that was Hayden performing that character. And then I think Matt Lanter comes in and he added a little bit more dimensionality to Anakin, and um a little bit more lightheartedness and a little bit more fun to the character, that
Mhm.
I think is very much informed by Hayden's performance at the beginning of Revenge of the Sith, right? But then the fun thing is that you get to then see that come around full circle in both the Obi-Wan Kenobi series and Ahsoka, when Hayden gets to come back and play that character again, with now like he's now informed not only by James Earl Jones but also by the performance of Matt Lanter in the Clone Wars, because he watched all of it and loved it,
Mhm.
right? And so
Which is
that
awesome, by the way.
it's the best. It's the best that he took that in and went, there's more to this character, right? And then got the opportunity to come back and give us more of that. And so, like, yeah, his performance in Ahsoka, I think, is the best Anakin performance across the board, like of all of them. But like I was saying, like coming back to Jake Lloyd in the Phantom Menace, I think there are some moments I man, I definitely talked about this on a podcast, but maybe it wasn't with you. Maybe it was I don't what did I record last week? Was it during, maybe it was during Rebel Cells. Was it during Rebel Cells that I talked about it a little bit?
I thought it was during the Phantom Menace memories we talked about this, but
I don't think so, because I hadn't watched the movie. Like a
okay.
lot of this stuff was like having just watched the movie, so I think it
Okay.
might have been Rebel Cells. So maybe I'm repeating a little bit of what I
Could it
said
have
on
been
Rebel
Tales of
Cells.
the Empire? Because like,
It might have been during the Tales of the Empire
yeah.
stuff, yeah. Um, but his the way that he like has the back and forth with R2 in the N1 is so on point. Like it's such a perfect performance of like delivering the dialogue on behalf of R2. And it's so reminiscent of Luke. Like it like the familiarity there, that George thing of like it's like poetry, it rhymes, right? That way that it sort of retroactively forward projects it foreshadows Luke and R2's relationship, um as well as like Anakin talking to R2 and all of that. Like it just, he nails it. Like Jake Lloyd nails it in
Mm.
that movie. And let's try spinning. That's a good trick. Like he just, it's like that stuff. Yeah, I'm not asking anybody to force themselves to like the performance or like the character, like the characterization. If you don't like that stuff, then that's totally like your call. But for me, when I go back and I watch it, and I think one of the biggest differences is this is the first time that I've really sat down and watched it sort of as a captive audience in a movie theater, which is a different experience than watching it at home, where you have distractions like your phone and, you know, get up and go to the bathroom, whatever, right? Um, you're much more dedicated in a movie theater. It's the first time that I've really had that experience since having kids. And there is a component of like kids talk like that.
Mm.
Like they like legitimately kids talk like that. And I think the thing that's coming across for me now more than ever before is that like George wrote that dialogue as like from the perspective of a parent. And so there's a difference between writing dialogue for kids in movies and writing kid, like the way that a kid speaks into a movie. And I think that he chose the latter. He chose to write Anakin speaking the way that a kid would speak. And I don't know how much of that's in the original screenplay or how much of that sort of changes on the day with Jake Lloyd, because I know that there's a lot of stories of like um not him being difficult to work with on set, but like just sort of like him being a kid, right? Like
Yeah.
and and I think in the same way that Harrison would say, George, you can write this shit but you can't say it, right? Like that's like the famous line that Carrie would always like sort of relay in when she would do her performances, that like Harrison said that to George. Is like, and so like that's when they started kind of rewriting some of the dialogue on the fly on the set, during the production of Star Wars. I think like I think what we're seeing there is that like is indicative of that, is that like George writes incredible stories. Dialogue's not his strong point, and directing actors is not his strong point. So the ones that can sort of, you know, find that themselves are the ones that shine, which is where we see like Harrison Ford, Alec Guinness, Peter Cushing, right? Like those actors stand out in that first film. And then in the prequels, you know, Ewan McGregor, Liam Neeson, Ian McDiarmid, I these are actors that like shine so brightly in that film because they're able to do that work themselves. Like they're basically able to direct themselves on set, and get their performances to where they need to be. Whereas other actors that I think needed a little bit more direction, I think Natalie Portman, especially at that age, needed more direction than she got. And so a lot of her performance in Phantom Menace, I would say, is actually probably the worst one.
You think so?
But I think so, but it's not on her. Like
Mm.
I think like she's like 16 when they filmed that movie, right? Like she's a kid. She is literally a kid. I So I don't put that on her, because I also then look at Samuel L. Jackson, who at the time, 1999, 97, 98, when they're filming the movie, is like he's already given incredible performances across his career at that point. It's not like Samuel L. Jackson is figuring out his craft. He's
Mm.
Sam Jackson, right? And yet Mace Windu, especially in the Phantom Menace, more than the other two movies, Mace Windu's performance is flat as hell. Like it's so dry, it's so characterless. um and I think that like in the next two movies that kind of becomes his character. especially in Attack of the Clones. I think like this party's over, right? Like that kind of becomes Mace Windu,
Mm,
but in that first one, it's like, yeah, he needed somebody standing there going like, can you give us a little bit more of something, because he was going too hard on the stoicism and somebody needed to pull him back a little bit. But and he's acting opposite a puppet, and like I think he was a little I think that Sam Jackson was a little bit lost in the process of making a Star Wars movie, and
mm.
his performance kind of suffers as a result. But yeah, like I think that that's just par for the course with George, and his directing, the way that he approaches filmmaking. Uh he is focused on other things, especially with that first one, especially with like we're doing this digital character for the first time. The background is full of all sorts of nonsense, and nobody else sees it, right?
Mm.
Everybody else is on set going like, all right, I get, like, we're trusting you, right? And George is the only one with that part of the vision of what he's going to do. And then I think with Attack of the Clones, it's like that shift to digital, like to filming on digital, was such a massive undertaking and such a massive part of it that, like, George does not get credit for. Both like those digital first, like that first stab at digital characters like Jar Jar and Sebulba, as well, and then that switch to digital cameras in Attack of the Clones, because he
I'm
revolutionized the film industry with both of those movies, and nobody talks about it, right? Which just drives me nuts. But
I'm sure you've seen it, but have you watched recently
hmm.
that hour-long documentary of making episode 1, The Beginning, it's called?
It not like super super recently, but I
Oh,
think that
it's
I watch
so
it because I
good,
think it's on
man.
Disney Plus, and I think maybe when
Oh, is
Disney
it really?
Plus launched, I think I watched it.
It's on the official Star Wars YouTube channel too. You can literally just search "making of episode 1,
Maybe it
The
was off of
Beginning,"
that.
and
Yeah,
it'll it's
I've
all there.
definitely watched it within like the last 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, it's so good, and it's so like I mean, I've seen it a few times over the years because like I'm pretty sure the first time we got it was on the DVD, and I watched
yeah,
the hell out of everything on that DVD. But like I really appreciate now, now that I'm like an adult and a creator, and like I'm constantly problem solving artistic,
hmm,
kind of it's, I don't know what the right word is, but trying to figure out okay, how am I going to deliver this thing that needs to be delivered. And I've really come to appreciate just how seriously the all the VFX guys are like, I don't know how we're gonna do this. Like,
yeah,
this is really expensive. And not only do we have to do it now, we have to figure out the technology so that we can do it for 2 more films, and then for also all the other films that everybody else is gonna wanna do it because, like,
yeah,
George knows that this is going to he literally knows, "Yeah, this is gonna change everything." We're, like, right on that cusp. So
yeah,
George knew before, like, they even started shooting or anything, he's like, "Yeah, this is gonna completely change the way everybody does these things."
yeah.
It's awesome.
It's an interesting thing with George Lucas, and sort of like his ability to sort of forecast this stuff, right?
Mm,
Because sometimes it pays off. It With A New Hope, it paid off, right? Him being able to like look at that and go like, this is the type of story that I want to tell, and I think that the audience is ready for it. I think that people will really enjoy this sort of thing. um Science fiction doesn't have to be dry, and it doesn't have to be hokey. Like, we can make it fun and serious, because up until that point, you either had 2001, which like push the envelope in terms of visual effects and the reality of the science fiction that it was putting on screen, or you had Flash Gordon, right? There was either end of the spectrum, and what George did was he brought together both of those things. It can be as fun as Flash Gordon, but it can look as real and take the world as seriously as 2001, right?
mm.
As anything that like Robert Heinlein would write, or Isaac Asimov, right? Like taking these real serious sci-fi things, but also adding in the flavor and the spice that is in something like a Flash Gordon, right? Like those serials and the fun sci-fi of the era, or his era growing up, I guess. But um, that worked out. Like that, him putting that together worked out, and there's a bunch of reasons why it worked out. And a lot of that has to do with the people that he surrounded himself with, which I think is actually one of his greatest skills. If people haven't watched the ILM documentary on Disney Plus, like please go watch that.
Mm.
It is one of the best documentaries I've ever watched, and like it's a documentary series, so there's multiple episodes of it. It's a very like long form documentary, but there's a lot of story to tell there of the
Mm.
formation of ILM, why it exists, and then why it was able to do the things that it was able to do. And so much of that was George looking at a group of disparate creatives and saying like, you've got the skills that I need, you've got the skills that I need, and you do. Like all like the three people don't know how to work with each other. You have no clue how to do that. And no one's ever done this before. And, you know, visual effects is a specific thing. And these people making visual effects over here are like, that's what they do. But I need people who aren't going to do what they do, because we need to do something different. Right. So he literally went out and he found different people with different skill sets, brought them all together, and it shouldn't have worked. And at first it didn't. Like at first it was chaos. But then again, he brought in the right people. And you know, some of that's happenstance, some of that is Alan Ladd also being a part of it. And Alan Ladd Jr. is one of the people who does not get nearly enough credit for Star Wars. We talk about George, we talk about John Williams, we talk about, you know, Phil Tippett, and you know, everybody that was at, you know, Dennis Muren and Joe Johnston and whatever, that were all at ILM in those early days. But Alan Ladd Jr. deserves way more credit, because we would not have Star Wars without him, and without him sort of like reining things in every now and then, and keeping things, you know, on track and under control, as well as fighting off the studio and defending the film and all of that sort of thing. So that's one big part of it. But I think like when it comes to the Phantom Menace, um George took a big swing, and it wasn't his first time out doing it, right? What is it? The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes is that first like CG character interacting with live action, right? With the stained glass window that comes to life or whatever. I've never
Mm.
seen the movie. I just know it from the documentaries, right? Like I just know it from all the Star Wars documentaries. But there's stuff like that. Willow is another really great example of George taking a big swing and it not working out. Because that movie was a massive flop. And was supposed to be another Star Wars, right? Everybody was expecting him to deliver another Star Wars, and it wasn't. Um, but it's another example of him, like, you know, taking a genre and going like, it's been this up until this point, but let's try and do something else with it. Um, I and taking a chance on Ron Howard, which I is the right call. Ron Howard is a phenomenal director, but he wasn't a phenomenal director yet. Right.
Mm.
So it's one of those things of him going like, looking and seeing Ron, and it's going like, you've got what it takes in order to do this, and I'm going to give you a shot with this thing. But like, probably too early for an undertaking like that. You know what I mean? There are so many examples in George's career of him seeing it before everybody else. And like I said, sometimes it pays off, but sometimes it didn't. But if you don't take those risks, people focus on the successes, right? They focus on Star Wars, they focus on the digital characters in the Phantom Menace and the prequels. They focus on these things that were the big swings that worked out, and then they ignore all of the things that failed. And then go like, oh, Phantom Menace is a failure. And it's like, Phantom Menace is not a failure. Phantom Menace is a success by every measure. It was a financial success. It was just recently, it's the most watched movie on Disney Plus right now, which is
Which is
wild to
awesome.
me. It's
It
so
is
great.
awesome.
And I think it's just it's indicative of the fact that, like, expectation is the thief of joy. Like, that's the quote. I can't remember who it's attributed to, but it's what I go back to all the time with stuff like this. People went into the Phantom Menace wanting, desiring, and expecting a specific thing, and that was more Empire Strikes Back, more Return of the Jedi. Which, I mean, when they got Return of the Jedi, they hated that. When they got Empire, they hated that. Right? Like, they're
Mm.
like the most ardent fans were vocal as hell about how this was not Star Wars, quote unquote, right? And they said the same thing about the Phantom Menace, but it is just the movie doing incredibly well, it being re-released in theaters for the anniversary, and then it being number one on Disney Plus this last couple of weeks or whatever, the most watched thing on Disney Plus, is just proof to me that all of that sentiment is incorrect, and is just like, it's just short-sighted, um you know, sort of like negatively rose tinted glasses, right?
Mm.
This idea that the original Star Wars films are perfect, they're not. Right? They're amazing, incredible films. Every single one is a perfect 10, right? By my definition of what I call a perfect 10. But so much of that is subjective, and so much of that is about the feeling and not the literal execution. um and the Phantom Menace fits perfectly into that. It fits perfectly into that, and 25 years later, I think so many people who had negative opinions have softened on those negative opinions. um I think a lot of the people who have the like who've made an identity out of those negative opinions have doubled and tripled down on them.
They have
But
to, right?
yeah, but you can tell, right? Like, you can tell who those people are. And what I say to all of that, and this is not gatekeeping, I've said this for a really long time, and I've never meant it as a gatekeeping statement. And I hope that it comes across in the way that I mean it to come across, and that people understand what I'm getting at. I don't think those people are Star Wars fans, right? I think that they like a couple of Star Wars movies. They might like The Empire Strikes Back, maybe they like Return of the Jedi, maybe they like the original, and maybe they like the novels, maybe they like the comic books, maybe they like a video game or two. Um and I think that that's totally fine for you to like those things independently of identifying as a Star Wars fan, because Star Wars is a lot bigger, especially now, but even in 1999, Star Wars was bigger than just those three movies. um but what I find is that the people who don't like the Phantom Menace, the people who don't like the prequels, who don't like the sequels, who don't like Clone Wars or Rebels or Bad Batch, whatever, right? Like, take your pick, because there's a bunch of these people who, like, really, really just like three movies. Maybe they like six movies, maybe, and maybe they like six movies and one TV show, but they complain about literally everything else. I look at that and I go, like, what's your problem? They start talking, and it's like, okay, so you have a fundamental misunderstanding of what Star Wars is at its core, right? And what that comes down to is that these are kids movies. These are films for children, and they appeal to the inner child in all of us. And, like, that's on purpose. That's by design. That's not serendipity, that's not happenstance, that's George, right? He made movies that intentionally would capture the imagination of children and adult alike. And, like, he wanted to make an experience for himself as a 20 something man, right, adult, that paralleled the experience he had when he was 12. That's what he was doing. Like that was his goal. That was his aim. And you look at his other films, you look at THX 1138, that's not what he was trying to do with that. You look at American Graffiti, that's not what he was trying to do with American Graffiti. But when he sat down to make Star Wars, the goal was super, super clear. This is a kids movie that everyone will enjoy. It's for the kid in everyone. That's why it's so at home at Disney. That's why he sold it to Disney, because that's what Disney does, right? That was what Walt Disney did as well, right? Like Walt Disney wasn't making Snow White for children. Walt Disney was making animated feature films for everybody who would appreciate an animated feature film, and that magic appeals to both the adult and the child, but it appeals um, to the same aspect of our psyche, that's present in both, right? So that's what Star Wars is about. And the people who don't like these movies, that's what they don't like. It's what they don't want. So when I hear people talk about Andor as the best Star Wars, that's all I need to know. Like literally, that's all I need to know about you to know that, like, oh, so you're not a Star Wars fan then. You might like some Star Wars. You like laser swords, you like X-Wings, you like TIE fighters, Darth Vader's pretty cool. But like what Star Wars really isn't it doesn't appeal to you, right? Um and like the part of it, because all of that probably sounds gatekeepy, but the part of it that I'll say is not gatekeepy, and the reason why I can say that this is not a gatekeeping thing, because it's like everybody is welcome. Like, come hang out and talk about Star Wars with me, but understand that it's okay for you to just like the parts of it that you like. Like I like that to me is the lesson that is hard to impart when I talk about stuff in this way, because it's like, if you don't like the Phantom Menace, I have no beef with you, so don't fight with me about it. I love this movie, like unabashedly, unashamedly, with no sense of irony. I think that this movie is phenomenally well made. I think that there are some of the best performances in Star Wars in this film. I think Qui-Gon is one of the best characters in all of Star Wars. And watching this movie again, like, it just, again, that expectation is the thief of joy. We all went into this movie. We talked about this on the last episode. It was like, how come there's only a Qui-Gon lightsaber? How come I can't get an Obi-Wan Kenobi lightsaber? He's the main character, isn't he? And no, he's not. Obi-Wan is a supporting character in this first film, and he becomes a main character in the next one. And I personally think, like, it's my opinion, and this is as a hardcore Obi-Wan fan, right? It's my opinion that if George had focused on Obi-Wan in the prequel trilogy in the way that he focuses on Luke in the original trilogy, that you would have a better series of films. But we have, like, it is what it is, and it's shaken out the way that it's shaken out. I do think that Obi-Wan is the central character of the prequels, especially when you bring Darth Maul back and you go to Mandalore and you do all of that stuff. Obi-Wan is the central character of the films, and Anakin is the supporting character, which is what, actually, if you frame it that way and you keep the focus on Obi-Wan, it makes that story more compelling because it's happening in the background, right? And it's like, so we're focused on Obi-Wan and we understand why Obi-Wan's making the mistakes that he's making and all of that sort of thing. And so when Anakin falls, it's like, oh man, like, if only he had kept his eye on the ball, sort of thing. Um, but yeah, like, I don't know, like I just like, we go into that movie expecting Obi-Wan to be the lead character, and then it ends up being Qui-Gon, and then you get the red letter media, uh, takedown of the Phantom Menace. It's like, who is the lead character in this film? Well, it's not this case. It's not this character. It's not this character. It's the guy that was introduced at the very beginning of the movie, who is then like, I'm going to direct all of the action. I don't mean like action as in pew pew. I mean like everything that happens in the film, from like I'm sensing an unusual amount of anxiety, right? Like, from the first words that Qui-Gon says in the movie, he is in control of the narrative.
Mm.
It's his story and it's his film, 1,000%. like he is the lead character of the Phantom Menace. It's not up for debate, and if you want to argue that there is no lead character of the Phantom Menace, then I think you're being intellectually dishonest, because it is so clear he's just not the character that you want to be the lead character of the Phantom Menace, which is a different conversation that we can totally have, because I don't disagree. I don't disagree, but I also then say Qui-Gon's one of the best characters in Star Wars, and he's in one film. He's in one film, but then we get Master and Apprentice. You know, fills in some gaps for Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, and we get the Tales of the Jedi stuff that fills in gaps for Qui-Gon. And I've only just started The Living Force, but obviously that, I mean, he is the character who coins the phrase within the franchise, so obviously he's going to be integral in that story. And I'm sure that you can say, because you've already read it, but
Yeah.
I'm sure that it develops his character greatly, right?
Ish.
Ish, okay.
It's more of a Jedi Council story than a Qui-Gon story, but he is the very important catalyst of that.
Mhm.
So, and I appreciated that. So,
Yeah, so there's a lot of storytelling post Phantom Menace to you know get across who Qui-Gon was.
mm.
But yeah, I don't know. I really, I don't know if you guys can tell, vehemently feel that the discourse around the Phantom Menace has been incorrect this entire time. Right, the things that we've argued about are not the things that we should be discussing, and like we've been focused in the wrong places, in talking about the prequels, I think. And I'm excited, a few years from now for Attack of the Clones to get this treatment as well, and for us to go back and revisit that film in the theater. Because
I feel
I
like
just
they probably will, right? Like
I
this
yeah
was
I
such a huge
yeah
success for them financially that like they'll be like, oh, we could do this with Attack of the Clones.
yeah I mean, I think it's a no-brainer, right? uh but yeah, like I don't know, I just think it's such a funny thing, because 4, 5, and 6, I mean, A New Hope comes out, it's not A New Hope, it's just Star Wars. Empire comes out and reframes A New Hope, and now it's episode 4, and it doesn't become A New Hope until even later, right? Return of the Jedi comes out, and I think it's around the time the Return of the Jedi came out that they retitled. I can't remember when that happened, or if it was with the VHS release, but um each film that comes out ends up reframing the context of the earlier installments, right?
Mm.
And I like eventually we get to the point where there's nothing for a long time, but then the dark times, right? We get our novels, we get Shadows of the Empire, we get some video games or whatever. But then the prequels come out, and the prequels completely reframe the original trilogy, and everybody hates the prequels. They hate the prequels. The prequels are the worst. These are some of the worst movies ever made. That's what people would say about the Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith.
Mm.
These are some of the worst movies ever made. People will literally die on that hill to this day, right? But then the sequels come out, and when the sequels come out, now all of a sudden, man, I really wish that they would let George make these movies. Well, when George was making these movies, you people treated him like garbage, to the point that he said, it's not worth it. I would like these 3 films to be made, but I will not be the one to make them. I can't put myself through it again. I'm too old for this nonsense.
Mm.
I am going to sell it to Disney, and he does. And I mean, like, we can talk at some point about that aspect of it, of Disney buying it and George giving them the story treatments, and then them just basically throwing them out and doing their own thing. That's a whole discussion topic unto itself. But like, you guys don't you don't want George to make these movies, because when he was making these movies, you didn't want them. You just now all of a sudden, because there's this other thing, and because you're hurt about these other things, and you haven't done the work to uncover why it's hurting your feelings, right? Why Ray being the lead character hurts your feelings, why Luke being a grumpy old man hurts your feelings, because it hurts your feelings. And so now all of a sudden the prequels, which didn't hurt your feelings in that way, they were a blow to your, your expectation, but they weren't subversive, right? I think like that's the thing about the prequels, is that the prequels weren't subversive. The sequel trilogy is very subversive. All three films actually are very subversive in the sequel trilogy, in different ways. I think The Last Jedi does it the best, but like it executes it the best. But all three of them are very subversive. I think it's why they're hated in the way that they are by the people who hate them. It's okay to dislike the sequels, by the way, because I know that, like, Joe, you are not a big fan of the sequels.
Oh, don't worry. I didn't need your permission.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that, like it's not, you don't, in order to be a Star Wars fan, you don't have to like every piece of Star
Yeah.
Wars, right? Like that's
I
the
also
other part of, like, I'm not trying to say that with the,
I don't
like,
lose sleep over. There are people who lose sleep over
yeah,
not liking the suit. It's like for me, it was just like, all right, this wasn't for me. There's gonna be more Star Wars. What's the next thing? Like that was it.
yeah, yeah. Um, but yeah, this there's now like cognitive reframing of the prequels as, you know, oh, these movies are actually really great, and it's like there are two camps in that, right? Because I'm not talking about those of us who were like 13 or younger when we saw the Phantom Menace or any of the
Mhm.
prequels, right? Or came into Star Wars post prequels at that age, like between 8 and 13 years old, right? Because I think that when those people say like the prequels are great movies, I love these movies, that's genuine, right?
Mhm.
But it's the people who were 14, 15, 16, 17, 30 years old when the Phantom Menace came out that have said a lot of nonsense online in the intervening years, that now are like, because they're mad about Ray being the owner of the Millennium Falcon, right? Like now that they have something even worse, something an even bigger existential threat to their Star Wars fandom, now all of a sudden the prequels are not the biggest offenders.
They're not the threat.
Yeah, and so now they talk about George Lucas and the prequels as if they've always been a fan, but it doesn't take much to uncover, because the sequels have not been out that long. It really doesn't take much to find some of these people who are very big voices online these days that had a lot to say when the Clone Wars was coming out about how it was dumb because it's a cartoon. And now they're like, I don't understand why Disney doesn't just make more Clone Wars. And it's like, you people are the worst. Like, I was there, dude. I like 2008 Frontlines, the Clone Wars podcast, clonewarspodcast.com. We were the Clone Wars podcast for the first 4 seasons of that show. And like the numbers reflected that. Like we had a massive audience at the time. And it's because nobody else was talking about Clone Wars the way that we were talking about Clone Wars. And that has changed. It's changed massively, and now everybody talks about Clone Wars like this. But at the time, like, I mean, like ask Kyle, ask Tim. We were out there, and we asked Jason, right, from Wampa's Lair. We were fighting the fight for that show at the time,
Mhm.
because people were like, this is dumb. Is this the future of Star Wars? I'm mad about it, right? And it was like, you guys, this show is great. And like, yeah, mileage varies episode to episode, right? But like, it's crazy to me when I see people try and change the narrative and act like they were they were there from the beginning. It's like, no, you weren't. No, you weren't. And now you try and you act like you were, because this Rebels is another thing. It's like when Rebels started, boy, oh boy, even more than Clone Wars, Rebels got so much flack. Oh, this looks like garbage. This show is terrible. This is just for kids. This is the Disneyfication of Star Wars. And now you have a bunch of people who are like, I've been a Rebels stan since day one. It's like, no, you weren't. Because once again, we were there day one with the Rebels podcast, which has now become Rebel Cells. Like we were there day zero. Like we launched that podcast before the show even started. And like, cause I was like, I'm on board. Like whatever Dave is serving up, like I'm here for it. Right. And it paid off for me. Like in terms of like Rebels being my favorite piece of Star Wars. Right. But I just find it so interesting to watch these people try and like get away with it. But the thing is that the people that I'm talking about, they're selling something. Quite literally, they're selling things, right? And so, like they just kind of go, they're fair weather fans, and I think like that to me is the thing. Oh, man, I sound like such a gatekeeper on all of
You
this,
are
but
sounding a little gatekeepy today.
I
I'm not
think,
gonna
but
lie.
I think my thing is that like those people are the ones who have been gatekeeping in the past,
Mm,
and they changed their history with Star Wars in order to continue gatekeeping where it's at now, right? So now, in order to be able to say that the sequels, that this Rey stuff isn't real Star Wars, or oh my god, Ahsoka is just a show about a bunch of girls in space, right? And they want to crap on this stuff, and then they're gonna use the prequels as a way to do it now. Like they're gonna
mm,
use that as ammunition in order to fight that, and they're the ones keeping people out, right? And so it's like I am gatekeeping. I'm trying to gatekeep Star Wars from the people who want to exclude people,
mm,
right? It's the we can't tolerate intolerance, right? Yes, it's a paradox, but that doesn't mean that it's wrong.
right.
Right? So it's like yeah, I'm going to gatekeep Star Wars from guys like Star Wars Theory, because guys like Star Wars Theory, I'm putting a very fine point on it now. Guys like Star Wars Theory are the ones who are trying to keep women out of the fandom. They're trying to keep um like queer people out of the fandom, right? They're trying to keep people of color out of the fandom, and like I won't stand for that. Right? Like I'm
No.
gonna like so I am gonna gatekeep Star Wars from those type of people, because those type of people, they're not real Star Wars fans. They're not, right? Because anybody is welcome to come and join us in the Star Wars fandom, even if it's just like, even if like the only thing that you like is Star Wars Resistance. I like which is not my thing, right? I'm not into it. But if you want to come, you want to hang out with me, and you want to talk about Star Wars Resistance, and you want to tell me why you think it's the best Star Wars and why every other piece of Star Wars doesn't get it, absolutely, you are more than welcome, right? And we can have that conversation. And I'm down for it. I'm enthusiastically down for it. Tell me why I'm wrong about Star Wars Resistance, please. Because if you can convince me, then I get to enjoy another piece of Star Wars more than I did before. So that's my attitude, and it's always been my attitude. But it does, I guess, require me to gatekeep Star Wars a little bit from the people who would seek to turn it into something negative. Um, so yeah, I mean, like, yeah. So if you want to call me a gatekeeper, then that's fine. But
I'm not calling you a gatekeeper.
no, I know,
Some
but
of some
I'm
of
just
the
saying.
language you were using was a little. I don't know if I agree with
I know
that,
it's
but
so it's so close to the line, right?
mm.
But only Sith deal in absolutes. So, uh,
Which is an absolute.
which is an absolute, it's paradox unto itself. But yeah, um, I don't know. Like, yeah, I just the experience of watching the Phantom Menace in the theater again and seeing just how great a film it is. And yeah, like it's the first act, perfect, flawless, literally until we get to Tatooine. That movie is perfect. We get to Tatooine and it slows down a little bit unnecessarily. And it would be nice to get into the pod race just a little bit faster. But we're kind of, you kind of enter into a second film when Anakin gets introduced. And so we're kind of starting at Act 1 with Anakin while Qui-Gon, Padme, and Jar Jar are in Act 2. So it's like the movie's kind of fighting with itself at that point. But then we get into the pod race and everything's great. But then the pod race ends and we go to Coruscant. We get to Coruscant. And now all of a sudden we're at Act 1 of Palpatine's story when we're in the middle or at the end of Act 2 of these other characters' story. We're kind of waiting for Act 3. But the reality of that is that the original trilogy are all 3-act stories. It is a 3-act itself in being that it's a trilogy. And 3-act is something that we're all super familiar with. But the prequels, all 3 of them are 5-act stories. They break down into 5 acts much more cleanly than they break into 3. And we are not as familiar with a 5-act structure as we should be. And the reason why they're 5-act structure is because they're Shakespeare, not Flash Gordon. Flash Gordon was the hero's journey, and the hero's journey fits really nicely into the 3-act structure. It breaks really cleanly into that. It does not break cleanly into the 5-act. And so the reason why people rub up against the prequels in a negative way is the same reason that you get people in high school being like, I don't like Shakespeare. It's the same thing. Like it's literally, it's coming from literally the same point, the same place of origin, and it has to do with the story structure. We're just not as attuned to the 5-act structure as we are to the 3-act structure. And the interesting thing I think about that is that like that is very much a Gen X forward thing, because the 3-act structure, we know it so well because of commercial breaks.
Mhm.
So our television programs are broken, whether it's a half hour or an hour long, they're both broken into 3-act structures, because the in a 22-minute show, a 30-minute time slot, we have 2 commercial breaks that break up the 22. I mean, we have commercial breaks at the beginning and the end as well, but they don't break up the story, right? Like we trisect the story into 3 acts because we have a commercial break a third of the way through and 2/3 of the way through. And so we have just become like so attuned to that when we encounter a story that's outside the 3-act structure, it's a 5-act structure, or man, like 6 or 7-act structures, we really don't know how to deal with that stuff, which is, like books will be like novels. I like it gets even crazier than that, right? Like there are other structures than the 3 and the 5-act structure, and we just don't talk about them, right? So and again, this is just media literacy stuff, and so I think the prequels fit into that, and it's one of the reasons why people get like, but it's supposed to do this now, and it's like, well, if it were a 3-act, it would, but it's not a 3-act, so it's gonna do something different. Um, yeah. Anyways, I I've talked so much about the Phantom Menace, and we're already at an hour. But Joe, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I guess just a little bit of a kind of realization that I had. Two realizations, really. While I was watching it, it was just I really, really, really enjoyed the kind of like social side of it, of being in a packed
Hmm.
theater of people really enjoying this movie after. I mean, you've talked about it ad nauseum, right? Like of how many, just this like onslaught of negativity that this film has received over the years, and then to
Yeah.
actually be sitting in the theater surrounded by people that really enjoy it, on top of also being one of those people that really just genuinely sincerely enjoys it. It was such like a nice feeling. And it's I thought about where I was the first time I saw it, where I was just starting to get like interested in girls, and like I wonder if I'll ever have a girlfriend, or if I'm always going to be a Star Wars nerd. um and like, you know one of my oldest friends who I literally met like 2 weeks before the Phantom Menace came out, and we bonded over Star Wars. My
Mhm.
friend Joe Cervera. Like, we literally met 2 weeks before the movie came out, and we're talking about how excited we were about the movie, and like that was how we started becoming friends. And 25 years later, he's in the theater with me, and we're still friends, and we're like best friends, and we're watching this film. And on the other side of me is the love of my life, my fiance Tina, who loves Star Wars, and we make Star Wars art together. And just like the way my life kind of went in the last 25 years, it was very overwhelming in like in a good way, in a like really nice way of like, man, Star Wars really changed my life for the better, and the Phantom Menace really was a big part of that. Um, so there was that, and then the other realization I had was as I was watching the film, I remember being a kid and being like, "Okay, come on, this is great, and I love this, but let's get to the lightsaber fight." I was like, "Okay, this is great, but let's get to the pod race. Okay, this is great. Let's get to the end lightsaber fight where everything goes down." And this time it was kind of the other way around. Like, I really didn't care about the action that much. I was spending so much time appreciating like the practical sets. Like, I know there was a lot of blue screen and a lot of CG, but like I was really appreciating watching the background extras and watching, you know, l- a lot of the actors do things that they really don't get a lot of credit for. Cuz like there's acting, right? There's line delivery, but there's also body language. There's also facial um reactions to things, and I really appreciate that despite the challenge of so many of those sets being, you know, uh, placeholders and like characters not really being there or actors not really being there and the actors having to use their imagination. We kind of already touched on it. That wasn't like a normal thing. Like it wasn't that certainly wasn't to this degree. And just I appreciate so much more now than I did when I was younger, and it made me laugh a little bit because it's like, man, my tastes have changed that I care more about watching Qui-Gon and Shmi talking about Anakin having this very vulnerable conversation together several times throughout the film. And seeing the two of them, a lot of people made the joke like, "Oh, Qui-Gon's is macking on Shmi," but really, Qui-Gon understood Shmi. And I really like appreciated their scenes together more now than I ever did before. You know, Even when I'm like in recent years, I just throw it on. I just want something on in the background. I'm working or whatever. Like when you're in a theater, you're forced to pay attention to the film, right? Like it's
Mhm.
you and the film. There are no other distractions. There are no, oh, let me pause this and whatever. It's you and the film, and like it's start to finish, man. Like if yeah, okay, whatever. You go to the bathroom, but like there's no getting off the train until you're at the station. And I don't know, it's just like a different experience that I've had even like when it was released in 3D a few years ago. Like I don't know if I've matured. I mean, maybe I did. It's difficult for me to admit to myself that I matured in general. Um, but I really gained a new appreciation for the film in terms of what it is, what went into it, and how it really just, like, affected my life and my fandom and my career, like, all these things, like, I can't imagine what my life would be like if Star Wars was those 3 movies and then that was it. And then the prequels just never became a thing, George never did them, there's no Clone Wars, there's no whatever, like, Phantom Menace really was, you know, the start of that. People say special editions are, but, like, let's be real, the special editions were practice for the prequels.
Yeah.
Um And, like, I don't know, man, like, I walked out of that theater feeling very grateful that that movie existed and just did its thing and, just kind of started what it started all over again, and it's just it's crazy. It's crazy to think that, you know, this film changed my life so significantly.
Yeah. I mean, well said, I think there should there's something interesting that perspective can give us on something like this, and I think
Mhm.
all those years, people saying this is one of the worst movies ever made, particularly the Phantom Menace, which
Mm.
I think really reflecting on it, I think Phantom Menace might be the best made of the prequels. Um, but now in a world where we've gotten things like Morbius and Madam Web, or even like on the DC side of things like Black Adam, right?
Mm.
I and some of the absolute, I mean, the Flash, like, you want to talk about a very poorly made movie with confusing performances. I mean, it's got one of the greatest performances in the DC canon in it, with Michael Keaton coming back to play Batman. He's so good in that movie that it shines despite the rest of that movie just being a total train wreck. But like, that is a movie that like it is not only um offensive because of like the misogyny present in it, but also because of just like the lack of care and attention to the filmmaking, and just just some of the worst CG. Like, there's worse CG in the Flash than in the Phantom Menace. Like, the Phantom Menace has held up better 25 years later than the Flash does less than a year later.
Mm.
That
I
movie is
mean,
awful to look at.
there are some ugly shots in Phantom Menace, though.
For
There
sure, for
are a
sure.
few that do. I mean, I hate this criticism where they say like, "Oh, it looks like a video game." Like, okay,
Yeah,
the technology was being literally
it
developed
was
here,
new.
though.
Yeah.
Like, shut up about that. Like, I don't want to hear it. But yeah,
Um,
no,
but
I
yeah,
agree that there are definitely some VFX shots that look better than you know some of the like medium level shots in Flash.
yeah, like the starfighter battle above Naboo is pretty flawless. Like,
Mm.
it looks incredible, and there's a lot of practical stuff going on there. There's a lot of models along with the CG, and that's one of the best things I think about the Phantom Menace is how much of it is still practical.
Mm.
And that would change with Attack of the Clones, with things going much 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 more digital. I for you know for better or worse, on in that instance. But like, there like I mean, Theed is almost all practical, whether it's shooting on location, shooting on
Mm.
sets, or the miniature work that they did to create the palace and stuff like that. And that's why it looks so good. That's why it's incredible, right?
And I
um
saw it on like because you had mentioned I don't remember if we were recording or not yet, but you had said the projector that you saw it in it was like
yeah,
a little bit blurry and it wasn't like super sharp. I saw it at an Alamo draft house and it was like crystal clear,
yeah,
super crisp, super sharp, and like I almost dislike watching films that way because when it is a little blurry, like the imperfections kind of blend a little bit better,
yeah,
if you know what I mean. But like even still, man, like it looks so like all of that stuff for the most part looked like it belonged there.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, but uh, I don't know. I think that we really have like the low water mark, right? The low benchmark is so low now
Mm.
that
Right.
I think when we compare that, you really genuinely look at the Phantom Menace. You have to be lying to yourself to say that this is a worse movie than some of the stuff that's come out in the last 5 years, because we've had some real garbage, and there's stuff from before Phantom Menace that is real garbage. The Phantom Menace does not even come close to it. It's just that the expectation is so high that in relation to that expectation, people were very disappointed by it. But I would challenge anybody to just do the work, go to therapy first and foremost. Like please go to therapy. Just go to therapy, because most of the people that we're talking to when we're talking about Star Wars, especially this podcast, the demographic on it is mostly men, and I'm just gonna say, just go to therapy, guys. Just go to therapy. You got stuff to work out. I
Look, we all have stuff to work out.
Yeah, yeah,
Going to
no, that's what I'm
therapy should
saying,
not
right?
be a stigma in
No,
general.
exactly.
Like,
But like, I am not kidding when I say, Star Wars fans, go to therapy and talk to your therapist about Star Wars and your relationship to Star Wars, because it is something that you need to unpack, and it's something that you need to come to terms with, because you're putting way too much of your identity and way too much of your self-worth in the fact that you are a Star Wars fan. I've been saying that for years. I because I was doing it, and then I don't know how or when or why, really. Somebody who's been listening to the podcast forever could probably find it on an episode, but there was a point where I realized, like, I've invested too much into this, like into the way that I'm enjoying this. And if you can get past that and get over that, work through it, like, you'll just enjoy life so much more. Everything will be better. But yeah, I I think that's it. I think I mean, like, I think that you and I could probably just go on and on and on and on for hours and hours about this movie, and there's so many things that we didn't talk about that we could have talked about. But I just think, like, it is a legitimately really good movie, and I'm just not gonna have patience for it anymore, for the discourse and for people trying to tell me that it's bad, and then me having to, like, equivocate and go, like, yeah, well, but in comparison to blah blah blah. So I don't care. That's your opinion. You can have that opinion. I think it's an incorrect opinion. That is my perspective on it. This is a very well made movie. It's very good, and I love it a lot. Um, yeah, I don't know. I came out of it thinking that you and I maybe need to do a ranking. We maybe need to do our Force Perspectives definitive ranking of the films.
Really?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, I don't think we're gonna agree on 3 of them,
Oh,
but
we're not going to agree at all. But um, yeah, I don't know. That's why I'm like, how do we do that? Because I don't think that you and I are going to be able to agree on
yeah,
ranking the
it's gonna be
films
hard.
themselves.
It's gonna be hard.
So it might have to be our own personal rankings. But
Okay. Yeah, I think that's fair.
so I don't know how we do that. I don't know how we approach that.
Mm.
But yeah, I think it's a conversation that we should have.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
it's
I'm
worth it.
down. I'm down.
But and I think what it needs to be is, it needs to be like a rewatch. Like, we need to go through and, like, week to week watch a movie, discuss the movie,
Yeah, that
and
sounds fun.
then
That's actually I think that sounds like a really fun way to do it instead of just doing like a one-off episode. That
yeah,
feels like something
yeah.
we can kind of build up towards.
It's got to be a series. Yeah, we
Yeah,
have to give it
I dig
each
that.
movie the time that it deserves. But awesome. The Phantom Menace is great. I think if you're listening to this podcast, you probably already agree. I don't think we've convinced anybody, because I don't think that we needed to convince anybody in this audience. But yeah, it's a great movie. It's a great movie. Full stop. Yeah, the debate is over. Uh, despite what Jimmy Smits would try and tell you, I awesome. Well, we'll be back next week. I know we said that on the last episode, and then we took a week off, but truly, we are going to put out weekly episodes of this. It was just a blip, but we'll be back next week to talk about more Star Wars. So, in the interim, hey, if you want to send us your opinion on this, there are a couple of great ways to do that. Social media is awesome for that. You can find us on all of the forms of social media at Force POV. I think I might take the ThunderQuack TikTok and I might transform it into the Force POV TikTok, but I haven't decided if I want to invest my time in that yet or not. But there's been a few things where I'm like, I really want to just rant about a Star Wars thing for a minute here, and TikTok would be a really great place to do that. But we don't have a dedicated Star Wars one, so I'm kind of like, maybe we transform that one. But anyways, on you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Force POV. So you can hit us up through those. You can either comment on this episode, or send us a DM or whatever on any of those social medias. But the best place to talk to us about this stuff, and to continue the conversation, is on our Discord. Go to thunderquack.com/discord, and it'll take you to the invite to the server, and then you can join us on the server over there. And we have dedicated channels for everything that we talk about on ThunderQuack. But yeah, we've got a Star Wars channel, and that would be the best place to continue this conversation. I know that some of you listening are already in that Discord, and we will continue this conversation over there for sure, because there's lots and lots and lots to talk about with this movie. But that's it. That's it for this episode. Thank you guys for listening. Joe, you got anything that you need to let people know about?
Now this is pod racing. That's
Yeah,
it. That's all I got.
That's it. Awesome. Thank you guys for listening. We will be back next week with another episode. See you then. Follow Force Perspectives on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at ForcePOV. And join us on Discord at thunderquack.com/Discord. Support the show by visiting us at patreon.com/thunderquack to get early access to episodes, leave a rating and review on your favorite podcast service, or buy merch at store.thunderquack.com. Force Perspectives is a part of the ThunderQuack Podcast Network.